In this lecture, I just want to explain the purpose of Blender's grid and world axis. Now, the axis just represents direction and position in 3D space, so it's just like those graphs from math class. In Blender, the red line represents the x-axis, the green line represents the y-axis, and the blue line here going vertically represents the z-axis. Now, where all the axes converge in the middle right here is called Blender's world origin, or the center of the 3D world. This position is 0 on every axis. In fact, if I press the N key for the right side toolbar here, with the cube selected, you can see that its position is 0, 0, and 0 on every axis. And that's because the cube's position is right there at the center of the world origin. Now, just like with those graphs from math class, the coordinates in 3D space have both positive and negative values relative to the world origin. For example, if I move the cube to the right of the world origin, you can see we have a positive value on the y-axis. If I move it to the left of the world origin, we have a negative value on the y-axis. Same thing with up and down. If I move it up, that's a positive value. If I move it below the world origin, that's a negative value. So in the end, the axis and these coordinates just help us know where in 3D space an object is. Now the axis has other uses as well, like if you wanted to rotate an object in a specific way, you need to know which axis to rotate it on. So let's say I wanted the cube to spin in place on the vertical axis, which is the z-axis. So I'll press R, and then press the Z key to choose the Z-axis, and I'm rotating on that axis. This is different than if I were to say press R to rotate, then press Y for the Y-axis. Now it's rotating on the Y-axis. And we'll be going over the many purposes of the axis throughout the course as needed, but generally it's just a reference tool. Now all these blocks all around the axis is the grid, and the grid accompanies the axis and just splits 3D space into increments, and it helps us understand where in 3D space our objects are, and is especially helpful in making precise measurements or movements. For example, I can move this cube over so that the center of the cube is 2 big blocks to the right of the world origin. So if we go up here to the location values, you can see we moved it over 2 meters, so it checks out. We moved it over 2 of these larger blocks. So we now have a location of 2 on the x-axis. By default, the scene is set to measure in meters, so every block, or every larger block I should say, is 1 meter wide right now. And we'll get into units of measurement more in the next lecture. Now the grid increments are actually dynamic based on your zoom distance. For example, if I zoom out this much, each one of these blocks represents 1 meter, and if I press G to move the cube and hold Control for snapping, it's going to snap it in 1 meter increments. But if I zoom in, those 1 meter blocks are divided by 10, and now each of these smaller blocks is 0.1 meters wide. So if I press G to move the cube, hold Control for snapping, and I move the cube, you can see it's moving in 0.1 meter increments now. And if I zoom in yet again, that gets divided by 10 again, and now these are 0.01 meters, and so on. So you can see how zooming in can give you more precise movements. Now I just showed you one of the biggest uses of the grid, called snapping. This allows us to move, scale, or rotate based on the grid's increments, so we can make perfectly precise and exact transformations. And there's going to be more about the snapping tools in the next section, but snapping, measurements, and referencing are the main purposes of the grid and the axis. And this is just an intro to those concepts. It'll be quite clear how to use the grid and the axis as we dive deeper into the course and learn more about using all of Blender's tools. But that's going to do it for this lecture, so I'll see you in the next one.